Welcome to part 15 in this series of videos on how to create a simple purchase order system using Blazor and C#. Currently, we can add purchase orders, but whilst we're in the process of adding an order, we cannot edit or delete individual order lines. Either we have to cancel the whole order or accept whatever it is that we've entered. In this video, we'll look at the ability to edit or delete order lines before saving the order. Before we look at the code, we're going to be following the general pattern used for editing tax rates. So let's just have a quick look at that. On tax rates, if we want to edit one of these records, we select the record and click Edit. And what that does, it takes the ID from this record here and uses that to retrieve the record for editing purposes. Now, in the case of purchase orders, when we're adding, we've got a slightly different situation. If I quickly add an order, the situation here is that if we want to edit a record, if we click on a row and click Edit, that's what I want to happen. But the problem we have is that these records haven't been written to the database yet. So the primary key or ID of these lines is unknown and certainly isn't something that we can get from a database. So I decided to, as a bit of a digression, I decided to find out what was happening here. I strongly suspected that the ID, the primary key on the PO line table is called PO line ID. I suspected that was 0 at this point. So I had a bit of an investigation to see if that was the case. So if we look at the code, and what we've got on the tax page is that on the grid, we've got a row selected or row select handler, and that then, if I look at that, look at the definition, that looks at the row select event for tax and returns the tax ID. So if we try and do that on the purchase order page, let's go back up to the select event and copy that. Into the purchase order page. And then create the row selected event. Right, this is what I want in the end, but let me just comment that out for the moment and put in some temporary code. So I'm just declaring a variable now called var test ID, and then I'm going to set that to be this. And I'm now just going to put a breakpoint in here and look to see if I can tell what the PO line IDs are. So let me run it. I'm going to add another order. And now if I click on one of these rows, the code should run and I should be able to see what the value is. And if I step through it by pressing F10, we'll see that it's 0. If I continue and click on the next one, we'll see it's 0 as well. So that's the problem that we face, that we can't tell the difference between the individual rows. So I had a think about that and thought, well, if they're all defaulting to zeros, perhaps I could assign a temporary value that would get overwritten when the order line was eventually written to the SQL database. And therefore I decided that I would declare an integer variable and set it to 0. And on the order line save, for every save, I'll decrease this by 1. So we'll end up with a series of IDs that are negative. And I've done this partially in anticipation of the fact that we will possibly be wanting to edit orders that have been saved later on. And if we then allow a new order line to be added, I don't want to be able to have a confusion between existing lines that will have real positive PO line IDs and temporary ones that have got negative ones. So that's, by having it negative, I can be fairly certain I'm not going to have any overlaps, any clashes. So that's the tactic. Let me take that breakpoint off there. And the first thing I'm going to do is declare the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this. I'm going to declare two variables, one for selected PO line ID and also a temporary one. So let's go back up to the declarations and let's put these in here somewhere, doesn't matter where. There. So I've got one called temp PO line ID and I'm setting it to 0, and another one for selected PO line ID. And then in the order line save method, so when we actually save an order line, I'm going to write an ever decreasing number to the PO line ID. So what I need there is here. So we're saving the order line, is checking that it's a new order. That's where we want it, is then checking that we've got nothing missing. So in here, let's put both of those in there. I've got PO line calc. I just want to make sure that when we're saving an order line, the calculation is always taking place. Then I'm saying temp PO line ID is equal to the existing value minus 1. So it'll start off at the first one will be -1, the second one -2, and so on and so forth. And then I want in here PO line ID equals, and that, and if I then go down to the bottom here and uncomment that, we should end up with a position that when we click a row, it's actually got an ID. So let me run it and add a record. So if I click on one of these rows, we see that we get That's the first row, so that's -1. That looks good. If I click on another row, the only other row, that's -2. So that looks good. It looks as if we're getting the result I intended, that we can increase the PO lines by a minus number. And that means that when we click on a row, we can identify the specific row that's being clicked on, and therefore we can edit it. So let's close that, take off that breakpoint, and get back to the code. So what we want to happen is that on the toolbar handler, we've got what happens if it should be added, but we haven't got anything, I should say editing. We haven't got anything here. And to save a lot of you watching me type, I've got this already. So if it's editing, we're checking that the user has selected a line. So if the selected PO line equals 0, issue a warning. Otherwise, we want to populate the add edit order line object with the order lines item where the PO line ID equals the selected PO line ID. And for safety, I've just put in here first or default. I've got status changed, and then it's awaiting the dialog edit order line to show. So that looks as if it should be doing what we want. And once it's edited, we've got to save it. And that's on the order line save. So if the order line PO line is equal to 0, it's going to do all this. But in this case, the PO line ID is known. So this is taking care of what happens if it's being added. And now we need to deal with the situation where it's being edited. So I think we need it in here. And again, to save a lot of problems, I've got one too many of those, I think. I'll stop the video and I'll come back when I've sorted out my brackets here. Right, that's the bracket sorted out, but I've now got await close dialog. And to sort that out, I need to just change this from being a void to an async task. Still not convinced about those brackets. That looks a lot better. Right, so an order line is being edited. So we're checking that a product has been selected, and if not, issuing a warning. Then we're checking that a tax rate has been selected, and if not, issuing a warning. Otherwise, we update the order lines grid. We have this status change. I've noticed that's not absolutely necessary here. I'm not entirely sure whether we need that or not, but it seems to work, so I'm leaving it in there. And then we're closing the dialog. And that should work. So let's just run it. Okay, so we'll try editing this one. It says it's already got 6 and unit price of £3.25 with a tax rate of 20%. If I can select it and click edit, I can then edit it. And if I make a change, right, we've got the tax rate missing, but we can change it. And in fact, let's try that one. Right, yes, we need to select tax rate, and that goes missing. We need to correct that. But apart from that, we can edit it. So let's close that and have a look at the code. And I think that's because the tax rate is not being saved when we do an order line save. Order line save. No, we're not. So what we want in here, PO line tax ID, tax ID. One more go, check it's working. Right, now first of all, I ought to check that if I don't select a row, we get an error, or at least a warning, yes, saying I should select one. If I select one from the grid and click Edit, I get everything I need, and I can swiftly just change that. Yep, that looks good. So, yep, I'm happy that that's working. Now, of course, we need to think about deleting an order line. So let's have a look at that. And the way that we've got this working on the tax page, if I won't bother running it, but basically what we do on the tax page, if we delete or try to delete a tax rate, a warning pops up saying, do you really want to delete it, and ask for the user to confirm. We don't want it to just disappear. So we're going to add a new dialog to ask for confirmation that the user really does want it to be removed. That's it. So let me just put the dialog in here. I'll put it in this section. So the dialog is being given a name, and it's got a header saying confirm delete, and we've got two methods, confirm delete yes and confirm delete no. So we want to specify it, or declare it rather. So where's our other dialog? That's it. We want to open that dialog on the delete on the toolbar handler. So here's the toolbar handler. That's add, edit, and delete. So we want some code in here. And it should say deleting. I think it's this code here that I've got. Yep. So it's saying if the PO line is 0, issue a warning asking the user to select a line. Otherwise, we're going to open that delete order line dialog. And we've then got two methods for confirm delete yes and confirm delete no. So let's add those at the end of the code. So we've got order line delete, and it's going to create a variable called item to remove, and we set that to the order lines.single, where the PO line ID equals the selected PO line ID. and then we remove it, and then we refresh the grid. So confirm delete, no, just hides the dialog and sets the PO line, selected PO line to 0. And if we confirm yes, we call this procedure method up here, and once that's completed, we set the PO line ID back to 0 again. So let's save that and run it just to check. I've entered some data to save you watching me do it yet again. And if I try deleting without selecting a row, I get a warning. And if I select one, click delete, it asks me to confirm delete. If I cancel, it's still there. If I select it again, click delete, delete, it removes it. So that's fine. That all seems to be working. But there are a couple of small changes I'm thinking of making. First of all, I noticed when I was editing that the header here says order, add order line, when it should say edit order line. And the other thing I've noticed is that when adding, if I add the first one and set the tax rate to be standard, in many cases, once you've selected a product, the tax rate is likely to stay the same. So to save the user having to keep on coming around here and selecting the same tax rate, I want to default that to be the same as the one on the first record. So let's have a look at the code for doing that. So the first thing I want to do is to deal with that header text. And first of all, I'm going to declare a string called dialog header text. And in the dialog, where I've got add an order line, I can replace that actually, since I've got it here already. Get rid of that. And I'm replacing it with dialog header text. And then what I need to do is that when we go down to the right, we can put it right at the top here. The dialog header text is add an order, and if it's on edit, it's going to say edit an order line. So that should sort out the header text. And the last bit is that I want to set the default tax rate. So what I want to do there is when we're saving an order line save, it adds the order line and then it sets everything back to 0. So if I comment out these two lines, they shouldn't get reset, so it should stay the same as the first line that we added. I'll run it again and you'll catch me up when I've entered some data. Right, so I'm now adding some data. And this is the first row, so I'll select standard rate. I'll select another row item for second row, and you'll see that standard rate is still there. We've got the heading Add an Order Line. If I select a row and go to Edit, it now says Edit Order Line. So that all seems to be doing exactly what we want. Now, just one final test. I'm going to save this, which I haven't been saving them up until now. If I save it, it's order number 1. And what I want to do is just check in SQL that we have got proper PO line IDs. So if I select the top 1,000 rows, and you'll see the PO line ID is 27 and 28, so it's not -1 or -2. So everything seems to be absolutely fine. That's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. As usual, I'll put the links in the description below to where you can find the code. If you've got any comments, I'd be happy to read them. Please leave them in the comment section, and there'll be another video coming along shortly. Thank you very much for watching.